السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Assalamu alaikum, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear students, and all our followers on the social media. Welcome to a new lecture in the series of lectures organized by the Strategic Studies Unit at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. It's my pleasure to introduce today's lecture entitled The Ukraine-Russian Conflict, the Repercussions of Hybrid Warfare. In it, we will try to analyze all the different aspects of this war. We will allude to the operational side, intelligence side, and some political and strategic repercussions at the level of the European continent. And I would like to mention a new study by Dr. Azmi Bshara, which is available on our website, entitled Russia, the NATO and the United States, and reflections on the conflict. It includes a comparative study and an analysis of the concepts of security, Putin's doctrine, and the expansion of NATO, and the different historical tracks. It's my pleasure today to present to you our first speaker, Olexiy Haran, who is a professor at the Kyiv State University and the founding dean of the unit at the same university. He was also in charge of the director of research and dean of the social sciences faculty at the same university, and was a member of the Euromaidan movement, and also was attached to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for 15 years. And his latest book is The Building of a Political Nation, which is on the war on the Donbass. He has 15 minutes to speak, then he will be followed by Petro Burkovskyi, who is a senior fellow at the Democratic Initiative in Kyiv, and since October 2017, and he is a graduate of the George Marshall Center for Security Studies, and he used to head the advanced strategic studies before, and he was senior advisor at the Ukrainian president's office. After that, in 2025, our both speakers will be speaking in English. We have simultaneous interpreting. That will be followed by some questions and answers and analysis in English, and the floor will be open then to your questions. Without any further delay, I give the floor to Professor Haran, if he's ready.
سيتفضل بروفيسور غران. Please unmute and share your PowerPoint.
Unmute. I'm sorry, I thought I shared. Do you see my screen? Do you see my screen?
Not yet. Share the PowerPoint.
Not yet. Okay.
We see you, but not the PowerPoint. Yeah, excellent.
Okay, now we see it, right? Okay. Shukran. Slava Ukraini. Salam alaikum. Salam alaikum is really important greeting because it means peace to all of us. We need peace. I am sitting at the north of Kyiv, which is actually about 20 kilometers from the northern front, which is the most dangerous, where Russians are trying to move from the territory of Belarus.
Professor Haran,
I
without
hear
disturbing, can you enlarge the PowerPoint? Just press down. It will be enlarged.
Okay. I hear. So I'm not far from front line. I hear explosions, but actually explosions are coming from the other side of the city. They are powerful, very powerful. So Kiev now is shelled by cruise missile. However, I think when Putin started the so-called military operation in Donbass, which now is a full-scale war, and this is not provoked attack, by the way, which was done early in the morning without declaration of war. Mr. Putin said that it's limited military operation in Donbass, but it's a full-scale war, and Ukrainian cities were bombarded through the whole country, from the east to the west. So, however, so he thought that Ukrainian army and Ukrainian government would collapse immediately, and he would be able to occupy Kiev and to install the puppet government here. However, we are resisting. At this point, no regional center in Ukraine is under control of Russians, though there are very heavy fights around. Ukrainian army is resisting. At least 3,000 Russian soldiers have already died. We asked the Red Cross to bring these corpses to Russia because Russia is denying these facts. So we asked the Red Cross, we are waiting for that. 200 Russians captured. We have a lot of documents which confirm this aggression and their confessions and documents. So the question, and by the way, Ukrainians are standing in long lines to get arms. So you know that in Ukraine, Ukraine is democracy. So we have a very tough political struggle, specifically between President Zelensky and opposition. However, at this point, nobody is talking about differences. All are united. So the question, why Putin failed here? Because I believe that Putin has already lost. He lost morally, he lost diplomatically, and even in the worst case scenario, if Kiev is occupied, Ukrainians will continue its resistance. There's no enough arms, just guns to take. So many people are ready to take arms. So why did he fail already? And I'll try to bring some facts from 2014, compare it to the present day situation, so for you to understand what's going on within the Ukrainian society. First of all, let's start with Maidan, a peaceful protest which lasted for 2 months, totally non-violent. And you see here the famous pine tree, because it was on the eve of the new year, with flags of many countries and European flags and Ukrainian flags. But look here, what is this flag? Guys, do you recognize it? You see it?
Can you make a picture larger?
Do you see it?
Make a presentation larger, like full screen presentation.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Can you
Hello? You hear me?
Yes, we hear you, Olexiy.
Okay,
just if you can make it larger, that would be
this
great.
is, yes,
like
so
screen,
this is Russian flag. This is Russian flag during Maidan in the center of Kiev. One more explosion. While I'm talking to you, there are more explosions. So why Russian flag is here? Because Russians were coming from Russia to stand here in Ukraine for their and our freedom. because Russia is not democracy. So they came here to support democratic movement. And that's the main threat for Mr. Putin, not NATO. Successful Ukrainian democracy is an existential threat to Mr. Putin. And definitely he hates all Ukrainians. He was saying on numerous occasions that Ukrainians are the same as Russians. So this is one people. There are no Ukrainians as a separate nation. So basically he denies even the Soviet nationality policy. Because I was born and studied in the Soviet Union, in my passport, it's clearly written in Soviet times that I am Ukrainian. Mr. Putin is saying no. It's just one people, one nation, one ethnos. Second point, he declares that Ukraine doesn't have a tradition of statehood and Ukraine is a failed state. One more explosion. So basically he repeats what Stalin was saying about Finland and Poland when Stalin attacked. Okay, ceaseless explosions. Валя, не турбуй мене більше. Ceaseless explosions. So what Stalin said about Poland and Finland when it was attacked by the Soviet Russian troops in 1939. So, as I have said, Russians, many Russians living in Ukraine, Russian-speaking Ukrainians, actually are united with Ukrainians in the fighting for freedom. So we have what we define as a Ukrainian political nation, which is based on territorial principle. I know that for some foreigners, it's very difficult to understand. You have Ukrainians, Russians, Jews, Crimean Tatars, different languages, a lot of the country is speaking in Russian language. So first of all Ukrainians are bilingual. We know Russian very well. There's no problem about it. But we are united in political nation. So I'm not asking, people are not asking, who are you, Ukrainian or Russian? One person may speak Ukrainian language, the other will respond in Russian language. So people understand each other pretty well. But the only criteria for being Ukrainian, it's not ethnic, it's not linguistic, it's not confessional, it's not geopolitical. Do you consider it as your country? And are you ready to defend it? And here we have a very striking examples, because most of Ukrainians who were fighting on the front line, actually a lot of them are Russian speakers. They are from Donbass, which was occupied by Russia. I met at the front line a Jew soldier, Russian-speaking Jew. By the way, our president is Russian-speaking Jew. I met Crimean Tatars. So a lot of different ethnic groups. And by the way, I would like here to make a reservation that I was never official at the government service. I was at the public council within Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I was a representative of university and other civil society organizations. So I was never an official. I am independent expert. And I will show to you how actually Ukrainian consciousness developed after the Russian attack. So here is the graph. Are you proud or not proud of being a citizen of Ukraine? So this is 2004. This is 2014. And last year, 72 Ukrainians were proud of being Ukrainian. You know, in time when there is a very difficult situation, economic situation, time of war, we have democracy, so everybody is criticizing the government. You know, the situation is not good, but Ukrainians are proud to be Ukrainian. And I believe after the start of the Russian attack, what we see in the streets, how people are collecting funds to support the army, this figure would only increase. So now,
Professor Haran, if you push the full screen button
before
down.
2014, Ukrainians believed it was possible it was possible to have friendly relations with Russia, and Ukrainians were always pragmatic. So we wanted both. We wanted to have the good relations with Russia and good relations with the EU.
Professor Haran, can you hear
However,
me?
after the start of the Russian aggression in 2014, the number of those who would like to join the EU increased. Basically, it's quite stable, but the number of those who would like to be in the customs union with Russia totally collapsed. This is a red line, totally collapsed. So now it's 10%, only 10% of Ukrainians. Okay, so we are democratic countries, so we have different views. We have different views from radical Ukrainian nationalists to pro-Russian views. We have a lot of spectrum, but the extremes, actually, they are quite marginal. Now, let's talk about the NATO. What happened in 2014? Russia attacked non-bloc country. Russia is talking now so much about neutrality of Ukraine, but Ukraine, in fact, was neutral before 2014. It was officially stated in our laws. Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons, the third largest in the world, in exchange of security assurance from the US, the UK, and Russia. So Russia violated all the obligations it signed. That's why, because we were actually a non-bloc country and we were attacked by Russia, support for Russia, as I have said, totally collapsed, while support for NATO skyrocketed. You see, the blue line, support for NATO. Before 2014, most Ukrainians supported non-bloc status, and only minorities supported membership in NATO. So after 2014, it's all changed, okay? And the recent figure, because it's a bit out of date, I'm sorry, I didn't prepare full updated presentations, because you understand, I live under explosions here. And now, if there is a referendum, 65% would vote in favor of the EU, and 60% would vote in favor for NATO. That's understandable. We are seeking for security, but we are not in NATO. There are no NATO soldiers here, no NATO bases, and no missiles in Ukraine. Actually, nobody is threatening Russia. Vice versa, there are Russian troops here, and they are here in Ukraine since 2014. One more thing, which is really important, is about Crimean Tatars. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea, where the native population are Sunni Muslim Crimean Tatars. So I would like to stress it. The people with very tragic history who were deported by Stalin in 1944, and they were allowed to come back only in 1990, only. And now the leaders of Crimea's Tatars are not allowed to come back to Crimea. So, and when I'm always talking to the Muslim countries, to the Muslim audience, I am always saying, please do not forget about your brothers, because they are Crimean Tatars are under repressions or in Crimea, and a lot of them are in Russian prisons right now. So the world should demand the release of Crimean Tatars prisoners and respect of their right, which is impossible in the next Crimea. All Crimean Tatars, they were strongly against Russian annexation, but Russia did it in the same way as Hitler annexed Sudetenland in 1938. Now, Donbass, again, Russian special forces came here and organized a revolt. However, they were on the verge of collapse by the end of August 2014, and then Russian regular troops again appeared on the territory of Ukraine in violation of all treaties, because Russia guaranteed its international borders. However, Russian troops appeared and they are staying in Donbass since 2014. Since 2014. So, and you see here how, with the help, support of Russian troops, violating also Minsk agreements, this territory was increased. However, even now, the territory which is occupied by Russia, these are not breakaway republics. They are not local independent actors. They are totally controlled by Russia in a totalitarian way. This is the whole Donbass, okay? And this part comprises 1/3 of the territory of Donbass. 2/3 are staying under control of Ukraine, but Mr. Putin actually now, he recognized so-called independence of these republics and stated, no, these republics should be enlarged to the whole Donbass, again in violation of everything. I am not talking here about Minsk agreements because after what Russia has done, Minsk agreements are dead, and actually Mr. Putin himself said that I am not going to attach to Minsk agreements. So he said it very openly. So basically, you need to understand that there was no domestic conflict in Ukraine, no civil war. We always had people with different views. Definitely in Donbass, the number of those people who are in favor of Russia was larger than in other parts of Ukraine. However, majority in Donbass, the last reliable poll in 2014 showed that 70% of people in Donbass, they were against joining Russia, against, and only Russian regular troops changed the military situations. So now I may end with what I have started, what totally unprovoked attack, Nazi style, with Goebbels type propaganda. It's not NATO, which is a threat to Mr. Putin. Again, NATO is not in Ukraine. And even theoretically, the way to NATO would be quite long. And however, there are Russian troops, killings, mass killings. Yesterday, they shot the Central Children's Hospital in the center of Kiev. Other places in Ukraine, we need your understanding, we need your support, and we need demand from Putin to stop the war and withdraw its troops from the territory of sovereign country. Actually, what Putin done in 2014 regarding Ukraine, Crimea and Donbass, he said like Saddam Hussein regarding Kuwait. He said, it's ours. There's no Kuwait. It's all Iraq. So Putin behaves in the same way. But now his actually plans goes further beyond Crimea and even beyond Donbass to the whole Ukraine. And I would stop here. Shukran.
Thank you so much, Professor Haran, for that presentation, and I really salute your bravery. You know, this is one of the very, very few presentations I ever hear under bombardment. So I salute that, and I wish you safety and security. So now I will move to Mr. Petro Burkovskyi, who is going also to speak for 15 minutes on the security and the military situation as well.
Thank you, Amar. And when it will be just 3 minutes left, please give me a sign. I will wrap it up and make conclusions. Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir. So I'm really honored to have such a distinguished audience right here. I'm really honored to have here our ambassador to the Kingdom of Qatar. And really, I see all of you as the people who are interested and compassionate to Ukraine and who want to know more what are the implications of this conflict and what are the security reasons for what have happened. I will divide my speech into 3 chapters, let's say, and I will start every chapter with the very well-known words. So the first chapter will start with the words of Karl von Clausewitz, the very famous German strategist, who said that the war is just the continuation of politics by other means. And we know that ultimately these are the means of destructions of all adversary resources. So from the very beginning, I would like to refer to the key points of my article, which I prepared on June the 5th, which was published on June the 5th, 2008, 2 months before Russia invaded Georgia. It was published in the most famous Ukrainian internet media, Ukrainska Pravda, which can be translated as Ukrainian Truth. So all my key points are published in 2008, but they still remain actual, and they still explain what is happening right now in Ukraine. So 2 months before Russia invaded Georgia, I outlined several key points of the Russian new security and foreign policy in the region. So first, it makes then 2008, it's now 14 years ago, Russia had started to use its economic and energy diplomacy to build special relationship with the European Union countries and corrupt their elites. Germans, France and Hungary's blocking of Ukraine and Georgia's NATO membership action plan at the Bucharest summit in May 2008 was an example that this energy diplomacy and the so-called privileged partnership with European countries are bearing a good fruit for Russia. Moreover, it was anticipated that Russian interest would soon be defended by NATO and EU member countries, which benefit from the construction of the gas transportation pipeline. In 2008, I thought it would be the South Stream, which is beneficial for Greece and Italy. However, the Nord Stream first was completed in 2011, and right now we have a Nord Stream 2. So Russia uses actually this energy diplomacy to corrupt elites and to make these countries to protect Russian interests as their own interests. So in 2008, all facts were present on the ground to suggest that Russia intends to challenge developing at that time US missile defense with modernized means of delivering weapons of mass destruction in order to maintain strategic and nuclear parity in the relations with Washington and China, of course. And Russia was going to use this parity as a tool to fend off its strategic rivals when it decides to use military force against its weaker neighbors like Georgia, Ukraine or Moldova. So it was evidently in June 2008, and what has happening in the next 14 years. And Russia will, since that time, Russia was paying much attention and increased attention to the military political component of its security and use of the military to achieve its goals, including preventive, as they say, preventive military attacks against weak neighbors. So that happened 2 months after in Georgia, and that happened in 2014 against Ukraine. And the third key point is that Russia will use and has been using its media and its insiders in the foreign media to support the project which increase tensions in the neighboring societies, create new social divisions and crush proponents of the national unity, and at the same time support proponents of reintegrations with Russia and support their coming into power, like it happened in Ukraine in 2010. Moreover, Russia would support and encourage projects which develop a different and obvious ties of kinship between people in other countries and people in Russia, like linguistic, regional, religious especially, hoping that it will help pro-Russian politicians in these countries to transform these countries into federal state with the so vast powers that inside the state, these parts of different countries will come closer to Russia and evidently will join Russia. So everything of this was done in Ukraine and Moldova. To sum it up, between 2004 and 2014, Russia has been actively preparing for the war in Ukraine using economic diplomacy to compromise Ukraine in the European Union and NATO and leave Ukraine without allies. It started to prepare its army for conflicts with neighbors and strategic deterrence force to deny NATO from interference into this conflict. It used political and media influence to bring loyal leaders to power and to divide Ukrainian society, impose hostility in the relations between different social groups. The top objective of all these measures was to turn Ukraine into a satellite state, a kind of political protectorate under complete Russian control. Right now in the world we have one example of what is this political protectorate. This is the state of Belarus. Looking at the Belarus, you would see how the vassal state, the Russian political protectorate, looks like. So that means that these states would be used as a launch pad for any kind of subversive or indirect military aggression against the neighbors of this state. So be well aware that if some country develop privileged partnership and host Russian military, that means a great threat to the neighbors of such country. And the lesson of Ukraine is very spectacular. So let me draw several lessons what should be done. First, closely watch and monitor Russian business activity in your countries. I mean right now the Middle East and Northern Africa. Usually it is followed by their intelligence and business report about vulnerabilities of the hosting countries. Who can be corrupted, what sums should be used, and what goals can be achieved by using the same influence. So watch closely and monitor Russian business activities in your country. They always come with the intelligence intervention. Beware of the Russian cultural project. Usually they are used not only to cover the agents for espionage and recruitment of the possible subversive agent and saboteurs, but also for legitimation of the Russian propaganda narratives that Russia is a peaceful country, that its culture is part of the world heritage, and moreover that their culture and literature is the only existing great culture and literature in the old post-Soviet space. That is not true. Just to remind you that, and the most difficult thing is that historical narrative of Russia. They stole everything from Ukrainians, from Kazakhs, from Georgians, from Belarus people, from Baltic people, and they all included into the great Russian culture, into a great Russian literature, in great Russian history, which is not the case. And the truth is now coming more and more, and I think it's really important for the countries in the region to study how Russia is using historical narratives and narratives of historical memory of literature in order to impose its influence over the societies, and especially among the elites of the hosting countries. And the third, and very important, monitor contacts of the Russian tourists arriving to your countries and from the countries of the so-called Collective Security Treaty Organization. Focus on the males aged between 32 and 60, women of the age between 26 and 40. Screening their contacts and movements, big data analysis of their activities will help you to avoid problems with your national security and deny entry for them in any future. So this is the end of the first chapter. So the best way, the current war is just what have been done for the last 14 years. Russia has been preparing this war for too long, and there were many early warning signs. So the question now arises, why Ukraine hasn't reacted to these early warning signs? Here is about the chapter 2. A famous Chinese ancient military strategist said, Sun Tzu, "To win without fighting is best." That was the strategy for Russia in Ukraine. The end game, as Russia thought that the end game has started in 2010, then they succeeded in bringing to power Viktor Yanukovych. And the state of Ukrainian military between 2010 and 2013 is the best example how the war can be started and could be possibly won without even before the first shot fired. Just to remind you what were the Ukrainian forces after the collapse of the Soviet Union. In 1992, the armed forces of Ukraine numbered 800,000 men. They have 30% of tanks and armored infantry vehicles of the whole Soviet army, 25% of the Soviet army air power in the European part of the USSR. Strategic offensive weapons included 176 intercontinental ballistic missiles with 1,180 nuclear warheads, so the third arsenal in the world, and in addition 89 strategic bombers that could carry bombs and cruise missiles, also with nuclear warheads. The Black Sea Fleet was also the best equipped of the Soviet fleet, and it was based in Crimea. And also, very important parts of the Soviet missile defense system were stationed in Transcarpathia, it's very far western part of Ukraine, and in Crimea. So, despite this huge military, and also Ukraine had a huge defense industry complex which can repair everything from missiles to light armored vehicles and tanks. Despite this huge military potential inherited from the Soviet times, Ukraine did not set on expanding the armed forces in order to achieve equal relations with Russia. Moreover, since 2010 and until 2013, the Ukrainian armed forces were purposely destroyed by the people who had very close connections with Russian Federation and were allowed to command big military units and even the Ministry of Defense. Let me just name the titles of the traitors and defectors who became Russian citizens and who were brought to power by the Viktor Yanukovych, the former president and a runaway, who was deposed by Maidan in 2014. Minister of Defense, Chief of the Security Service of Ukraine, which is a domestic intelligence, Chief of the Foreign Intelligence Service, Commander of the Internal Armed Forces, which now are called the National Guard, the national commander of all internal armed forces, Commander of the Ukrainian Navy, Commander of the Security Service in Crimea, Chief Executive Director of Ukroboronprom, Chief Executive Director of Ukroboronprom, business state-owned holding which united all defense industry enterprises in Ukraine. So in the beginning of 2014, these people did everything to ensure that Ukrainian ships did not go to sea in Crimea and the planes did not take to the skies and the army would not defend their people. So these were subversive action, but a subversion on a very high political level. So therefore Russia prepared for this kind of invasion. Right now, what we have. So how we managed to succeed? Here is the chapter 3rd. And I will start with the famous slogan of the Special Air Service, as you know, United Kingdom Special Air Service, famous logo, who dares wins. So, despite the fact that our armed forces were beheaded by Russian influence, that we lost political leadership in 2014, the civil society in Ukraine was the most formidable enemy to Russia. Russia actually failed to divide the people in Ukraine, and as Professor Haran just showed, that due to the people, we withstand the first assault in 2014. Although we lost territories, the Crimea was occupied and certain regions of Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast were occupied, but the volunteer forces, the highly motivated military officers, they all made enormous contribution to defeat of the Russian forces and to containment of the Russian invasion for the last 8 years, since 2014 to the current day of the invasion. So, what is the key for this success? First and foremost, it's the training and experience. We cannot underestimate the role of Ukraine's participation in United Nations peacekeeping operations, joint missions and trainings with the most advanced NATO armies, the United States, the United Kingdom and Canada. All of this Ukrainians. So the first lesson that should be learned. If you can, please go and participate in the United Nations peacekeeping forces. That makes your people learn a lot on the field. If you need to train your military, send them to the best universities and to the best military centers and let them train. And of course, the most valuable experience is to speak to the people, to communicate with the people, and to train with the people who has the real combat experience and has the experience in the action. So, therefore, besides this lesson, I would also right now address and refer to our host country, to Qatar. So we have a highly trained with with remarkable experience officers of the Special Operation Forces. Right now they are defeating Russians in the east. However, we also have wounded soldiers of the Special Operations Forces and the wounded officers of the Special Operating Forces. Right now I see that the Qatar is a highly developed country with the very good medicine. So I think that after war ends, there would be a queue of the countries who wanted to see these people and to know their experience and how they managed to defeat the Russians. So please be the first. Help us to heal our warriors and our officers, and they will share and they will stay with you and tell you what is the modern warfare right now and how the huge enemy could be defeated and what should be done and how it's possible. So learn the experience, help us right now and learn the experience then. And yes, to sum it up, Omar, who is a great host and now I can say a great friend of mine, asked me to say several implications for the MENA region. So let's say I see, as far as I was said that here it could be present the representatives of Russia, I would discuss only several of these scenarios. First scenario would be quite reasonable for Putin, is that the restoration of pre-war conditions. It means that Putin agrees to talks because it's only up to him to agree to talks, that he withdraw troops but continue to occupy Crimea and Donbass. That would mean that the Russia would remain a very dangerous player, and it will start to build intensively the arch of the rock states, the states which are also under sanctions. That it will proliferate the means of delivery. Thank you, sir. The means of delivery of the weapons of mass destruction. So, and in the region, you can name these states which are thinking about the most sophisticated means of delivery of weapons of mass destruction and who are seeking to develop the weapons of mass destruction. I'm speaking about nuclear weapons. So Russia would start giving these countries these weapons in order to create havoc and chaos in the Middle East. Because if it is isolated, the only source of Russian power will be oil and gas revenues. And if you create havoc in the Middle East, that would mean high oil and gas prices. So please beware and do the containment and preventive measures to stop this and to control the proliferation of these weapons and build the coalitions with your regional partners, because it will affect everybody in the Persian Gulf and also in the South Asia, of course. Second scenario doesn't have more differences from the first. If Russia loses war, it will become even more dangerous. And I think that if Ukrainian troops which will pursue retreating Russian troops would enter Crimea, I think that Russia would directly threaten Ukraine and Europe with using of the tactical nuclear weapons. So, therefore, right now we are working hard with the G7 countries, with our NATO countries, in order to have an advanced missile defense. Because only the good missile defense can deter Russia from using technical nuclear weapons, using bombers and cruise missiles, which they are now using right now against our people and against our country. And the last thing that I think that's the most desirable scenario both for Ukraine and for Russia is that when Russians started to lose so badly, that the true officers of the Russian army, and as I think there are people who are officers of their own armies, they treat the soldiers as their children, and they don't like them where children are wasted for nothing. And if there are truly officers in the Russian army, they would turn back and would direct their anger and their weapons against the men who started everything and who lead to the enormous loss of life on both sides. So the third scenario is that Russia loses the war and re-engages with the West after Putin is deposed by his own military. And that would mean that the stability finally would come to the European continent. And of course, I think one region in the Middle East would collapse, as it happened with the rock regimes in the early 90s, which were supported by the Soviet Union. When Soviet Union collapsed, the same dictatorships in Africa, let's say Somalia, Ethiopia, they all collapsed. And so this is also can happen in Syria, I think. And that is all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Petro, for that fascinating presentation. Lots there to engage with. I have just a few brief observations. I'm going to give them out, and then I'm going to open the floor for discussions and more questions. First, just to this is not in defense of the Ukrainian government or anything, but the strategic alert rarely works. It didn't work for the Americans in Pearl Harbor. They knew that there's an impending Japanese attack. They did not They fired the first shot. They torpedoed a submarine. So they attacked. They fired first, and then they still got surprised. It didn't work for Saddam in '91. It didn't work for him in 2003 again. It didn't work for Stalin even when everybody was warning him of Hitler's attack. So just to put it in comparative perspective. But just a few observations on the current situation. The first observation is related to the title of the lecture, because I think Professor Haran mentioned something about hybrid, and why is it hybrid war, not just war? Obviously, conflict includes war and hybrid war, but it's hybrid war basically because the way we understood hybrid warfare in the West is very different from allegedly Mr. Gerasimov and his ideas about hybrid warfare, and in general. Russian military doctrine, it perceives hybrid warfare as part of a spectrum, as opposed to just focus on subversion, information operation, psychological operations, cyber attacks, and alliances with armed non-state actors, proxies, and so on and so forth, with a very light footprint, if you wish, so little green men between quotations and so on. It perceives it as part of this is the low end of the spectrum, if you wish, and then it can escalate to an intervention, an invasion, nuclear threats, and we will talk about the nuclear, because I have a question on the tactical nuclear dimension. But also in the same time, ceasefires, diplomacy. I think in addition to the leaked documents that were about the Gerasimov doctrine, between quotations, whether it's accurate or not. But also in another printed evidence is the 160 pages of the so-called invasion plan of 2014, because the 2014 was not just about Donetsk and Luhansk. There was a plan to basically storm all the way to Dnieper, and then more or less split the country into East and West, a la East and West Germany or North and South Korea. But that failed mainly because the Ukrainians did not listen to the allies and just fought back plan B, and fought back quite successfully, pushed them all the way back to Donetsk and Luhansk, and actually liberated over 50% of these territories. But the point is, it sees the idea of hybrid warfare as a lot larger than we understand it in Western literature, if you wish, in literature of security and strategic studies. And Crimea perhaps is the best example, other than just printed documents. You saw in Crimea the cyber attacks, the information warfare, the psychological operations, the infiltrations that Petro spoke about, very, very deep infiltrations, switching sides, the agents, so-called between quotations, agent in charge, the GRU elements that were placed in Crimea. This person we can bribe, this person should be killed, this person, kidnap his son, send it back to Russia. This person is an ally, we don't need to do anything aside from supporting him and elevating him, and so on and so forth. So very much subversion tactics, and at the low footprint. But then you kind of almost win the most important strategic part of the country without almost a shot being fired, and with very limited casualties. But then you make one of the largest air assault campaigns in probably European history, if not in history per se. The air invasion, basically, that happened in Crimea, which is very, very traditional. So here you have the full spectrum, from the very low to the very high. And also some tactical threats, nuclear threats. The call to Poroshenko, allegedly, I wasn't there, allegedly Putin's call to Poroshenko, and threatening him with nuclear weapons. And then also the movement of the strategic submarines, using ultra low frequency and basically putting them on nuclear alert, which is basically if the NATO is eavesdropping, here's our nuclear submarines getting to are put on nuclear alert. So quite an interesting signal. So this is one on hybrid warfare. The other thing, and this is observation, and I would like to hear the observation of Olexiy and Petro. And I would like also to salute Mr. Ambassador Andrei, if he has any comments later on, for sure, and our friend Ole. that one on the manpower really. So let's say the most important success of Russian military reforms was the putting the mass mobilization aside and focused on the most experienced soldiers, and they did this in a fascinating. That's Putin's contribution. This is like purely Putin's contribution, because in what happened is that you would have a brigade, 3 battalions. You would put 2 battalions with the inexperienced conscripts aside, and then get all your experienced battle-hardened officers and put them in 1 battalion. So, and then put those on the front, so push them towards Ukraine. So, and this is what created the so-called BTGs, the Battalion Tactical Groups. The most important success of Mr. Putin's reform was on 26th of February 2014, because in 2 days he was able to mobilize 40,000 of these relatively experienced officers, professional officers and soldiers on the borders of Ukraine. If you want a comparative example, I had to go back to my notes back in on my master's on Russian military strategy in the Caucasus. In 1999, when the group of Chechen militias intruded in Dagestan, it took the Russian army 3 weeks to get 1 paratroop battalion in Dagestan, which is part of the Russian Federation. So 40,000 in 2014, 40,000, so about 20 battalion tactical groups, and 1 battalion in 3 weeks in 1999. So that's the difference. But what I see now in Ukraine is back to the conscript situation. The POWs are all born 1999 and 2000. So which tells me something. They don't have, that's one interpretation. I could be wrong. They don't have enough experience once to send to invade. They don't have enough manpower. So the 220 divisions of the former Soviet Union is not there anymore. And to invade a country, well, the second largest country in Europe after Russia, over 600,000 square kilometers, to control it with significant reforms on its army as well, because the Ukrainians have been busy as well. It's not an easy one. And then the third observation has to do with the. Am I fast or slow down a bit? Okay. This is for the translators. I feel bad for them, so I'm sorry. The third observation has to do with the famous or infamous Soviet doctrine of escalate to de-escalate. So if you looked at the concept, it turns around our whole perception of deterrence theory, also in Western literature. So deterrence theory, you would not use the nukes, but you signal that you have the capability and possibly the political will, if necessary, to use them, but you don't use them, right? So escalate to de-escalate is you start from the end of deterrence theory. You know, you basically use them, tactical nukes, to get your preferred result in a conventional warfare situation. So I'm not saying this is going to happen, but if anyone has some feedback, because the threats are there were quite a few threats done, and Russia has enough. Well, Ukraine used to have I think over 2,500 tactical nuclear weapons and handed them over, and then over 1,000 strategic nuclear weapons are also handed. So 2,500, just to give you a comparative figure, that's 10 times the tactical nuclear weapons that the United States have at the moment. And that's not even Obama administration. That was Bush. Yeah, so you cannot blame it on liberal Obama and that. So this is my third point, and then my final point actually has to do with the Ukrainians. Basically, currently, that's the largest army in Eastern Europe. Put together, this is probably larger than the last 10 members that joined NATO in terms of its manpower. That's in terms of quantity. In terms of quality, definitely battle-hardened compared to the last 10 members that joined NATO. As I mentioned, it had some successes earlier on, It still suffers from a very aging air force, and they lost significant. I think 25% of the air force was lost in Crimea, 17% of their defenses. So it suffers some hits. But however, it's if you're NATO, you probably want them on your side with these capabilities. I am not sure how this is going to end, but I think there will be some strategic implications for definitely for Ukraine, but also for NATO in terms of enlarging the alliance. We saw Georgia in 2008. It was in a way that was similar but different. So the similarities were the Georgians were winning on the ground. Basically all the engagements with the Russian forces, the Georgians had the upper hand, including wounding the head of the campaign and then multiple POWs. But they were losing on the air. The strategic bombardment did its exact result, very similar to 1967 Arab-Israeli war. You lose the air ground, although you're still holding on the ground, but the psychological effect of the strategic bombardment is significant. So something might be very similar to the current situation now in Ukraine. I'll stop here. Thank you very much. I will take questions, and after that can I come to Mr. Ambassador as an intervention, as a final intervention, if that's okay. I just to get all the questions to the speakers, and then we'll allow you.
Well, I think actually I would like to add something practical and academical to this discussion, since I'm the person with military education. I used to be at this war at Donbass for 7 months at the front line, myself in person, and we are doing some practical actions. That is why the combination of the practicality and academicity would be on benefit of all the participants. If I may, of course. You are the...
Okay, please go ahead for, perhaps a comment, and then we'll go back to the question. Just not to...
and that is why I would also receive some questions to be responded. Okay, no worries.
Please go ahead.
Well, let me introduce myself, Andrei Kuzmenko, Ambassador of Ukraine to the State of Qatar. Former military in my past, then for more than 10 years I was busy with the nuclear disarmament of Ukraine within the framework of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then different assignment in different countries. Plus, of course, legal education, some other educations, including the NATO Academy. So, but before we start, if I may request silence for 10 seconds, each of us, to pray for the souls of Ukrainians killed by Russians, Ukrainian soldiers, civilians, and kids. And this is probably the less we can do for them. Thank you. Thank you for this enormous side of solidarity with Ukrainians. So I will start in academical dimension, since we are at the academical institution. What does it mean, the hybrid war? Well, this is the war with the combination of use of different type of warfare. The convention weapons, partisanship or proxy groups, proxy forces, terrorism, nuclear terrorism. I mean, not the use of the nuclear weapons, but the terrorism at nuclear sites and objects. The use of cyber attacks against the critical infrastructure of the state which is under the attack. Additional instrument of this war is the use of the internal discrepancies in the state between different political movements, difficult national movements, even different cultural societies. Just skip to Ukraine. We do have everything from that. Use Russian forces, use proxy forces like Donetsk and Donbass, so-called militia. This is a Russian term, but they are bandits, terrorists, and Russian hybrid troops. We have cyber attacks. We are successfully resisting them. We have the use of the discrepancies between the different part of Ukrainian society, Russian-speaking, Ukrainian-speaking, Orthodox of Ukrainian Patriarchy, Orthodox which belongs to the Moscow Patriarchy, people who speaks in Russian, speaks in Ukrainian, but everything is failed right now at the face of this aggression. And Ukrainian people are united. We even stopped criticizing our government, which is the most famous feature of the Ukrainian nation. Yes, the methods of this war. This is a variety of them, but I will just point out few. The support of separatism, including the acts of sabotage and state terror. In Ukraine, we had Russian support of separatists in Crimea, of some Russian affiliated circles at Donbass. Now, even at the western part of Ukraine, the Russian support and Hungarian support, some national minorities which would like to be more visible and to receive certain preferences, including the political ones. And the most important feature, the aggressor is trying not to be affiliated with the conflict and show just publicly its support or certain political push, but not the personal assistance. It is quite clear message. Yesterday I was looking at the Russian propaganda TV. Well, actually, propaganda and lie, these are also the methods of the war. Russian propaganda and lie. And the speaker of the General Staff of the Russian Moscow Federation, the speaker of the General Staff told the militia of Lugansk and Donetsk Oblast are successfully launching their attack against Ukraine with distanced fire support by the Russian armed forces. No victims in the Russian forces we have. Stop of this quote. This is the propaganda quote, and this is the means of warfare. Plus, to that, the next stop, next point, next means is the direct use of their forces, but under the proxy formations, without military insignia, without the recognition of them as a part of the Russian army. Then the aggressive pushing on some ideological myths, some ideological conception. For Ukraine it was so-called Ruski Mir, or Russian world, which is actually the calca from the Nazi of the Second World War, theory of the Lebensraum for German. Lebensraum, and another push is, another teza is the necessity to recompensate certain difficulties for Russian-speaking people to defend Russian language, to defend Russian culture. Everything of that we do have in Ukraine now. What I would like to tell also, this is not something very new. In fact, a kind of hybrid wars we can find from the beginning of the modern civilization. Probably the first one was the conquer by Romans of German tribes and German counties by providing them with Roman culture, by providing them with Latin language and certain benefits as the citizens of Roman Empire. As far as Ukraine is concerned, the first, probably the hybrid war of the modern time at the territory of Ukraine, it was the Russian invasion in 1980, when Kiev was taken by the Russian troops. It was the pushing on teza regarding the unity of Ukrainian and Russian people, about the historical belongings of Ukrainian territories, Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian churches, Ukrainian heritage to Russian, and about the necessity of solidarities between the workers of all the countries. Unfortunately, at that time we failed, and this hybrid war was extremely efficiently used. Later on, we had 3 invasions in 20s of Russians against Ukraine, and all the theoretical topics were the same. But let me look from...
Can I just give the...
No,
no. Okay.
Let me look from another angle. If we have hybrid war, we have hybrid defense. And in such
it's a subject
terms,
of a forthcoming book, but we'll talk about that in a bit. Yeah. But please,
we would like to have discussion, or we would like just...
Please I'll give you 1 more minute, and then we'll go ahead, if that's okay.
If there is no other way, please.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And if we have strategic defense, it's just 2 minutes. We have hybrid defense. Probably we are looking at the first time in the history of the humanity for this so huge hybrid defense, and in the terms of the scope, I can tell you, this is my, let's say, my idea, that we are already in a stage of the hybrid, of the global hybrid defense of Ukraine. What I am talking about? I'm talking about the sanctions. Russians deprived from the banking sectors, from their assets, from the possibilities, from technologies, from stock, from supply. Field of cyber security. Yesterday, well, or 2 days ago, the most known in the world grouping, Anonymous, launched the war against Russia in the cyberspace. Now, a majority of the governmental sites, governmental means of electronic communications are blocked. Then I would like to, next bullet, the strategic limitations as the part of hybrid defense. You know, the European countries of, well, neighboring countries with Ukraine, all the NATO countries and the EU, in fact, they have closed the airspace for the Russians. And right now, to even some neutral countries, like the traditional friend of Russia, Finland. And right now, just to fly to isolated Russian conclave, which actually was the German city of Königsberg, it is necessary to make the flight in duration 9 hours. To sum up, I would like to remind you the great words of the great person. We will fight at our beaches. We will fight on our roads. We will fight in our forest. We will fight in our mountains. We will never surrender. Sir Winston Churchill, the 4th of June 1940. That time the great nation was consolidated. Right now we do see the appearance and consolidation of another European nations, and the results of the aggression is a failure of the strategic plans of Mr. Putin. More than 308,000 of Russian dead, more than 250 Russian prisoners of war already in the Ukrainian hands, more than 20 jets downed. Just yesterday we downed 11 helicopters, more than 120 tanks destroyed, and around 500 the armed personnel carriers and other different means of transportation of Russia. They are in a shortage of money. They are in a shortage of oil for feeding up their engines. They are in a shortage of even simple food for their soldiers. And the soldiers are like someone asking, give me the food. This is the funny situation about the Russian soldiers, but it's not just only funny, it's awful, disgusting, and shameful. Thank you so much, and thank you for probably violating the rules, but sometimes it's necessary to violate the rule to tell the truth in a full scope. Thank you.
Thank you. As you said, it's time for hybrid, so I appreciate the hybrid. I was not trying to interrupt actually the new research. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. And I was not trying to interrupt you. Actually, my new research project is called Hybrid Defense. The article is about to be published, and the book is coming after it. So, but it doesn't speak about the dimensions you mentioned, but other mainly tactics. So excellent. So now I have lots of questions. So let me first ask our attendees here if they have any questions or interventions. Dr. Shams, please.
تعاطفي مع الشعب الأوكراني في محنته وعزيمته مواجهة العدوان الروسي. الأوكرانيين الآن يقاتلوا
of the Russian aggression, so the Ukrainians are fighting in the front lines, as it was the case in the 19th centuries when the country of the oppression, which is now the reserve of world oppression, and it is a prison of people. As a researcher in the Arab Center for Studies, and as a Syrian who has suffered, and a Syrian who knows the circumstances in which Ukraine lives. So Putin targets hospitals, targets cities and residential areas in Syria. He emptied the cities of Syria of half its population, and he is attempting to do the same thing in Ukraine. So that is why in his radio stations, in media, they say that we carry out accurate and surgical military acts, but they are targeting the infrastructure of Ukraine. But the main question that we have to face, so what are the reason or the international political scene that has allowed Putin to carry out such acts? He's a dictator in the heart of Europe. So the main reason, in my view, is the failure of American foreign policy, starting from the Gulf War, the position of the US vis-à-vis Iran, vis-à-vis Georgia, and how they acted during the Obama administration, and this policy culminated in the position of the US vis-à-vis Syria. They have left the ground for Putin to destroy Syria, while the whole world, the free world, was watching what was happening on the ground. This is all what I have. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Dr. Ahmed, go ahead. شكرا جزيلا للمحاضرتين. أنا أقدر لكما أن هذا الوقت هو
and I want to ask really a question, since you asked people to think about what's really happening, to really reflect on the experiences. So to you and to Dr. really Haran, since you mentioned really Dr. Haran that there's really a shock that happened now that's helping to cement a Ukrainian identity. And since you also, Petro, mentioned the sort of the formation of a new maybe sense of Ukrainianness that's really going on. I sort of heard from you a discussion about a narrative versus another one. So there are two really narratives at play, one that's posed by Russia and the one that seems to be posed by the West. There are a lot of people in the world, billions, in what's so-called the global South, that have issues with those two narratives. And you're reaching out and you're telling people, beware of one of them. The history of intervention in Africa and Latin America doesn't bid well at all for one of the narratives, at least also for the both of them if we come to the Middle East and North Africa. Both really superpowers, both the liberal West and the despotic East, they supported extremely oppressive governments that massacred and killed and maimed and threw in jails. So from a global South, perspective, isn't it, or I would want to ask you to reflect on the narrative that maybe Ukraine, when it comes out of this, not if, when it comes out of, to think about really positioning itself. Is this really valid? I mean, I know that in times of war, it's very cheap really to talk about very, theoretics, but is it really feasible that the Ukraine thinks of a different really alternative? Thank you.
هل توجد أي أسئلة أخرى من الحضور أم أبدأ من
From the audience present with us here? I'm going to start with our followers, dear followers. So I'm going to read the questions in Arabic, and then you can listen to the translation into English. Olexiy, can you hear the translation into English? Okay, great. There is a question from Dr. Muhannad Salloum. Was there a strategic mistake by letting go of the nuclear weapons that Ukraine used to have? Was that a strategic mistake? Another question from Muhsin Gharbi. He say, has Ukraine violated the Minsk agreement? So there are so many details when it comes to Minsk 1 and Minsk 2. There was, practically on the ground, there was no agreement. Another question by Abdel Ilah Jaffal. Why does the West deal with the why doesn't the West deal with the Israeli invasion and oppression the same way it deals with the Ukraine dossier? Muhammad Matar is posing a question. What are the expected repercussions of the Ukraine-Russian conflict and the impact on the Palestinian cause? Another question about the United States of America and Western Europe. They knew about what was going to happen. They knew the Russian aggression. Why didn't they move and act in order to deter Russia before the war started? Another question, has the United States of America pushed Ukraine to enter into such a war and After that, it let go of Ukraine. So the fighting in Crimea, there was pressure from the West, do not fight, do not provoke, but perhaps you can comment on that if you wish. What is Russia is going to benefit if it enter into a kind of geopolitical attrition while China is expanding from a geo-economic perspective? This is a question by Mr. Mehriz. Can the EU countries defend Ukraine and European territories without the intervention of the United States of America? So these are the questions that we have. So I'm going to start with Petro, and after that I'm going to give the floor to our guest via Zoom. And there is another question from Mariam Al-Maadid. Is the international participation with Ukraine, is it going to lead to Ukrainian victory, particularly that we heard that there were calls for those who want to participate?
Please go ahead. Yes, thank you very much. I will try to answer every question, but if I something let out, that means that I don't have confidence to answer. First, the question about the rethinking the foreign policy. Yes, the short answer, brief answer, yes, I think there will be a rethinking. Well, right now, we really, the war is the situation when you see, as they say, the friend in need is a friend indeed. We have seen who are our friends, who hesitate or who try to continue to appease the Russia, or who are bystanders. However, we also discovered that world knew very little about Ukraine. So also we need more efforts to invest in order to deliver to the, as you said, the global South, who we are, why we fight, and what unites us. As far as I see, that we were the Russian colony and we were colonized forcefully, as you know maybe very well, from the late 18th century. Until the late 18th century, Ukraine was far more sophisticated and educated than Russia. The first university in the Eastern Europe was opened in Kyiv Mohyla Academy, and it was closed when Kyiv was captured by Russia. And actually, we both, with Olexiy Haran, we are both of, he works as a professor and graduated from the Kyiv Mohyla Academy, which was restored. But Russia has destroyed not only our statehood in the late 18th century, it actually tried to eliminate all our cultures, and that was the colonial legacy. And I think one of the narratives that we would deliver when we succeed is that we do understand all the sorrows and all of the suffering of the colonial nations, and therefore, yes, we think that we will join where our national interests allow us to support the countries who also suffered from the colonial past. So that is like a brief answer, if I may. Secondly, has the Ukraine violates the Minsk agreements? Actually, the Minsk agreements were the tool to subdue Ukraine and to turn Ukraine into the vassal state. That was the Russian objective. Our objective when we negotiated about the Minsk agreement was to have a respite, to have a pause in the war, to prepare ourselves for the major war, because in 2015 we expected that Russia is going to crush us, that we are on the wake of the invasion, and we use this pause to enhance our capabilities, to strengthen our commerce, strengthen our economy, and build up our military. And I think right now we see the results that we had this time, and we used this time properly. Yes, we could do more, but still we used this respite very properly. So we do not violate the Minsk agreements. We use the Minsk agreements to strengthen. Next, about the what the West, what will be with the why the West deals with Ukraine invasion differently than with the Israel invasion. I think the answer is we should look at the foundation of the Israeli state after what it had happened. The West supported Israel because of the World War II and because of the Holocaust. This is how I see it. So there was, as you know, the Convention on Genocide was drafted by the people who suffered from genocide and Holocaust, and therefore the West feels a lot dedicated to Israel. And that is why we also, there is a different story. We are not supported like Israel, no. We do not have, the West doesn't think that it has the same obligations before Ukraine as before Israel. So this is the difference, I think. The fourth one, the expected repercussion for Palestinian cause. I must frankly say I'm not a specialist on the Middle East, so please excuse me. I cannot speak about this Israeli-Palestinian conflict on a. I'm not a professional on that. Sorry. U.S. and EU, why they do not deter Russia? Although they know that they are what are they going to do? Well, they deterred. They brought warnings, and certain European countries helped us and supplied us with arms when they see that the invasion is imminent. And of course, we should bear in mind that Russia is a nuclear state, as a nuclear power, and I think right now it's a rock state with nuclear power, and it takes a lot of brinkmanship and the skill of diplomacy how to contain and not to let them go further. That is why there are a lot of discussion. And of course, another point is a lot of European politicians thought that Ukraine would not sustain the shocking attack. So actually, they did not believe, and therefore, Italians and Germans were so strongly against the sanction. Right now, I think they understood their mistake, and I think they would rethink their policy, and they start doing and they start behave differently. Have I time, or have I let others to? So has the UA? Has the US pushed? Maybe the question about has the America pushed Ukrainian into war? Well, the Americans actually played a very important role, and our ambassador to Qatar knows he participated in the talks of the nuclear disarmament and giving up the nuclear weapons. Actually, this was the trilateral talks where US and the US bilateral, yes.
Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Russia, and United States.
Yes.
The issue of the succession under the
yes. But I mean the major players were Russia and United States, and so United States from the very early 90s it wanted to avoid conflicts in the former Soviet Union. This was the strategic goal of the United States: avoid any conflict, deter any conflict, mediate between all different sides. So Americans tried to mediate between Armenia and Azerbaijan, between Moldova and Russia, and they also tried to mediate between Ukraine and Russia when Russia conquered the Crimea and Donbass. They are not interested in the war in the Soviet Union because they think the consequences could be so dire that the nuclear conflict is possible and proliferation of nuclear arms is possible, and proliferation of nuclear arms, I see, is the nightmare scenario for the United States. So they are not pushing Ukrainians to the war. They try they do everything to avoid this war. Well, fighting. Can the European countries defend themselves without NATO? Yes, I know two European countries who can defend themselves without NATO. These are France and Great Britain. Because of the and
I'm not sure about France.
no, France military is great, and I think also Sweden and Finland can also defend themselves, and Switzerland can also defend, but it takes Russians too far to get to Switzerland. They cannot get to Kiev, so I don't think they can get to Switzerland directly. So, and that's it. I think only 4 countries can defend themselves if they let alone, will be alone, frankly speaking.
I think excellent. Thank you, Petro. I'll move to Professor Haran, but just on the last point, that was an estimate that in 2014 a unit would be cold ready in the Ukrainian army if 50% of its manpower and 40% of its equipment can make it out of the base. And I can frankly tell you that lots and lots of NATO countries would not reach that. You know, that's and this is 2014. You know, before so it's a crisis for East Europe. It's okay. Professor Haran, please go ahead. I need you to to unmute, Professor Haran. Unmute, please. We can't hear you. Yeah. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, shukran. Yes, regarding the influence on Middle East, yeah, I would not also elaborate on now on that because I'm not specialist directly on MENA region. We can tell something, but it's a lack of time and there would be some simplification in this discussion. So I would leave it maybe to another seminar. One thing I would like to point out is that Ukraine and Russia are also the exporters of grain to the Gulf states. And how would this conflict? Definitely it would not be beneficial for grain market, especially for this region. So this is just one of the consequences. But there are also others. So I think that Ukraine is deterring larger Russia. You have also problems in the region. There are also countries that are threatening Gulf countries. So, and you have your own choices how to defend your countries with support of allies. Now, regarding Minsk, look, if we go deeply into Minsk agreements, that would be, you know, just, we should talk for half an hour more. But to say briefly, so yes, Minsk Accords were Minsk agreements which were signed under the barrel of the Russian gun. So therefore, in Minsk agreements, there were two parts. One is security, favorable for Russia. The second, political concessions from Ukraine to Russia, which definitely no Ukrainian parliament. It was beyond the constitution. It wasn't signed by Ukrainian presidents, and it wasn't ratified by Ukrainian parliament because there's no majority for that. But nevertheless, Ukraine said, okay, let's move towards political concessions, but first of all, let's implement security on the ground. And ceasefire, this was number one. The ceasefire had to be installed on February 15th, 2015. Ceasefire. It was never installed. Russians violated brutally. The second, withdrawal troops, weapons, the exchange of prisoners, and so on. It was never done. So how could we proceed to political concessions without having ceasefire on the ground? Well, what Putin did just recently, he openly said, Russia do not stick to Minsk agreement, full stop. So basically, there was a game who will implement what parts of Minsk agreements, but the sequence was clear. Security first. So it's not Ukraine which violated. We can elaborate and discuss. There are many tricks in these agreements. Yeah, if you invite me for another lecture, I will do that. Now, regarding what happened in 1994, mistake. Well, I think it was inevitable. Ukraine was in such a geopolitical situation. Yes, Petro rightly said we were pressed by the United States, the West, Russia. So I think we had to give up nuclear weapons. The question on what conditions. And that's what we lost. We were very young, 3 years old, young statehood with all the problems, with undefined, internationally not recognized borders, Russian pressure, American hesitation, and so on and so forth. So that we didn't get really, you know, security guarantees or even security assurances, which are in the titles of Budapest Memorandum. So now the Western policy, yes, I agree. So the Western policy towards Russia was to try a dialogue, to have compromises. They didn't believe in what we were saying since 2014, that there is open Russian war, there are Russian troops in Donbass, Russia is violating everything. And the West was saying, no, it's necessary to have compromises with Russia, to have a dialogue. And actually, the West wasn't pushing to a war. And America didn't push to a war. So they tried to avoid the conflict. I would say that the crisis they have in Ukraine is after Afghanistan, you know, to have such a huge problem for them, nuclear brinkmanship. And that's why the West was trying to reach a compromise with Putin. Actually, what happened now, in 2014, nobody in Ukraine, including myself, maybe Petro as my student, he's more clever than me, but I didn't believe that Russian troops could come to Ukraine and kill Ukraine. Incredible. No, it's not possible. Nobody believed that. They did so. Now, when we were calculating what are the risks of large-scale war, most Ukrainian specialists, they were saying, no, it's suicidal for Putin to start it. No, he will not do that. Maybe he will do limited military operation in Donbass or in Mariupol or in the south of Ukraine. But he started large-scale war and he lost. So that's a huge mistake for Russia. China would definitely benefit from it. Russia is transforming into a younger partner of Russia. So I think, well, if we are looking at the polls, so I've shown to you that the political Ukrainian nation actually started to emerge long before what happened in 2014. But definitely what happened in 2014, what is happening right now is a huge boost for Ukrainians to realize who we are. And definitely we can speculate whether we will be in the UN, whether we would be in NATO, what would be the relations with Western countries. But for us, it's clear. So we are looking for democracy. We are looking for European values, human rights. Actually, this is part, and pluralism. Pluralism is in Ukraine since 1991. So this is very, very important for us. So we are different. Ukrainians are different political orientations, different, but we are trying, you know, to have a dialogue. This is in our political culture, actually. And at the same time, we demonstrated that we are ready to fight. So I summoned some of the questions that were put to us, but now let's have, because we were talking about hybrid defense. So let me show something which just appeared on Ukrainian websites. Okay, so just a moment. So share screen. It's 30 seconds. Okay, so now, just a moment. Oops, yes. Okay, so Russian tanks are coming. What Ukrainians without arms, this is in the village, what they are doing? Hybrid defense.
Make it bigger. It's light.
So Ukrainians just blocked the road for Russian tanks without arms at all. Okay, now a little bit different. Russian tanks are moving. Look what will happen. So there's a lot of Russian tanks, a column of Russian tanks. What's happening to them? Several tanks are destroyed. One tank is moving, others are destroyed. So we use Turkish Bayraktar drone. Many thanks to Turkey. And finally, if we're talking about hybrid war, we started a new site, Minister of Interior. By the way, my colleague told me that there is an ambassador of the Russian Federation here. Is he present?
No, he's not present, but
No?
you know, we still, of course, there is no neutrality when it comes to killing civilians or invading an aggression, but at the same time, we're trying to focus on the analysis. So,
Okay.
thank you for that.
Okay. Look. No. So that's what we are doing now. Because we have a new site, okay, where there is an information on all of Russians who died in Ukraine. So they're here, screenshot. This is a screenshot from this. So you have the photos of the document. Let me see if it's here. The photos of the document of those who died in Ukraine and who is captured in Ukraine. And there is a possibility for Russian mothers to call to the number. So this is a hotline for Russian citizens to know about what's happened to their child, if they are still alive, or they are dead, or they are captured. And they may call and receive the answer. So actually they might find their children. So if possible, if a Russian ambassador is here, it's possible for him to send this link, to send the number, contact number, to mothers and fathers of the soldiers, so they know about the fate of their children. So again, I will stop here so that we may have a lot of discussion. But this is actually, you see the document of the Russian soldier. So it's possible to at least to identify and to help those in Russia who is trying to find their children. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Haran. And I think we ran out of time, so I cannot take any more of the questions that are here. But obviously, this is an unfolding situation, and we will have more. This does not end here, definitely. So we'll have more discussion and more focus on it in the coming few days and weeks, maybe. We wish you all safety. Especially Professor Haran. I know you're in a very dangerous situation. I am very grateful for you again to make that presentation. We also wish hopefully peace will prevail eventually, and that war will end soon. And I have to thank all the attendees here, including Mr. Ambassador, who came and gave us his intervention. I also would like to thank the followers on the social media as well. And at this point, we will have to end the lecture, and we will be again discussing that issue further on in the future, as well as other topics within the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies events. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We pray for peace in Ukraine. Thanks a lot, dear friends.